Have you ever noticed how tired you feel after explaining yourself over and over again, like you're running a race that never ends, trying to convince someone that your heart was in the right place? It's exhausting, and it's not just about that one conversation. It's a pattern, a reflex. You say sorry when you didn't do anything wrong. You explain your choices as if someone else's approval gives them meaning. You justify your feelings to people who never really cared to understand them in the first place. This constant need to explain is not just a habit. It's a wound that says, if they don't understand me, I'm not safe. If they don't accept me, I'm not enough. This is how trauma speaks quietly, consistently, and convincingly. It convinces you that your voice only matters when it's accepted, that your actions only count when they're validated, and that your feelings are too much unless they're palatable to others. Somewhere along the way, you learn to survive by over-explaining. Maybe you grew up in a space where being misunderstood had consequences. Maybe love came with conditions. Maybe silence was dangerous back then, so speaking up became your armor. But now you're in a different chapter, and that armor has turned into a cage. The truth is, constantly explaining yourself is not about clarity. It's about fear. It's the fear of being misjudged, of being rejected, of not being enough for someone else's expectations. And when you keep living in that fear, you give away your power every single time you over-explain. You abandon yourself just to be acceptable to others. You water down your truth just to be more digestible. And what's worse, it never satisfies them, because the people who demand your explanations the loudest are usually the ones who have already decided not to hear you. Healing begins when you see this pattern for what it is, a survival mechanism, not a personality trait. It's not who you are, it's what you learn to do, and once you see it, you can choose differently. You can choose silence, not the silence of suppression, but the silence of strength. The kind of silence that says, I know who I am. I don't need to be understood to be whole. I don't need to be accepted to be enough. There's nothing more liberating than realizing you don't owe anyone an explanation for simply being yourself. You don't have to justify your healing. You don't have to explain your distance, your peace, your no, or your boundaries. Not everyone will understand your journey, and that's okay. Your growth is not up for debate. Your peace is not a negotiation. You're not here to be palatable. You're here to be real. So, the next time you catch yourself about to explain why you walked away, why you chose peace, why you stopped responding, remind yourself, you don't need to explain. You need to heal, and healing doesn't require permission. It requires silence, self-respect, and the courage to choose yourself, even if it means walking away without a single word. There comes a moment when words no longer serve you, not because you don't have something to say, but because you finally realize that not everyone deserves access to your truth. Silence, in that moment, becomes sacred. It's not about ignoring others. It's about finally hearing yourself. When you stop trying to be heard by those who only listen to argue, when you stop trying to pour your soul into people who only show up with empty hands, that's when you begin to reclaim your energy. That's when your silence starts to speak louder than any words ever could. You see, people often misunderstand silence. They mistake it for weakness, for indifference, for emotional shutdown. But the truth is, silence is strength. It takes incredible courage to stay silent in a world that demands constant noise. It takes power to walk away from an argument, to let go of the need to have the last word, to choose peace over performance. Because silence is not the absence of communication. It's a higher form of it. It's saying, I no longer need your permission to be at peace with myself. When you get quiet, you become dangerous not in a harmful way, but in a way that signals growth. People notice when you no longer react to their manipulation. They notice when you no longer chase closure, when you no longer seek validation in their confusion. That kind of silence disrupts patterns. It shakes the ground of those who once depended on your emotional responses to feel in control. Your silence creates a mirror, and some people don't like what they see in it, but that's not your responsibility. There is a deep kind of healing that only happens in stillness. When you choose silence, you give yourself the space to listen to your own thoughts without interference. You begin to differentiate between your truth and the noise others have projected onto you for years. You begin to hear your intuition clearly without the distortion of everyone else's opinions. And that clarity, it's priceless. In the silence, you realize how many times you've broken your own heart just to make others comfortable. How many times you've dimmed your light to avoid offending someone's darkness. How often you've explained yourself to people who never planned to understand you in the first place. And suddenly it hits you. All that energy could have been spent on healing, on growing, on becoming. That's why silence is so powerful. It creates room for alignment. It helps you reset. It allows you to step back and ask, is this even worth my peace? And most of the time, the answer is no. You start to see that not every opinion deserves a response. Not every comment needs your attention. Not every misunderstanding requires your explanation. Sometimes, the best way to rise above the noise is to simply stop participating in it. This silence, this pause, is not about shutting down, it's about leveling up. You're not avoiding the conversation, you're choosing a higher one. You're not giving the silent treatment, you're giving yourself time to reconnect with your power. And when you do speak again, it won't be out of desperation, it'll be out of alignment, purpose, and clarity. So if your heart is weary and your spirit is tired of over-explaining, let silence be your refuge. Let it be your power. Let it be the way you choose yourself again and again without saying a single word. There's this lie we've been taught, that choosing yourself is selfish, that putting your needs first somehow makes you cold, uncaring, or too independent. But what they don't tell you is how many times you've chosen others at the cost of yourself. How many times you've silenced your voice so someone else could feel louder? How many times you've delayed your healing so someone else could be comfortable in their chaos? Choosing yourself isn't selfish, it's survival. It's the moment you realize that you can't keep pouring from an empty cup just to keep the peace, especially when that peace was never real to begin with. You reach a point where you're tired not just physically, but emotionally and spiritually drained from overgiving. You start to see the patterns, how people show up only when they need something, how they praise your strength until it inconveniences them, how they admire your kindness but never return it. And slowly, you begin to understand that no one is coming to save you, that waiting for someone to value you the way you deserve only keeps you stuck in a loop of disappointment. The only person who's truly responsible for choosing you is you, and that choice is not always easy. Sometimes it means saying no to people you love. Sometimes it means walking away from situations that once felt like home but now feel like prison. Sometimes it means being alone with yourself long enough to hear the parts of you that have been silenced for years. Choosing yourself means taking ownership of your energy. It means setting boundaries not to push people away, but to protect your healing. It means allowing yourself to matter in a world that constantly tries to shrink you. You'll be tested. There will be people who call you selfish, dramatic, or cold when you stop overextending yourself for their benefit. They'll guilt you for changing, for evolving, for not being as available as you once were. But what they're really upset about is not your growth. It's the fact that your growth means they can no longer manipulate you in the ways they used to. Your silence, your boundaries, your refusal to explain yourself, it unsettles them because they were never interested in your well-being, just your compliance. But you're not here to live a life of compliance. You're not here to sacrifice your peace for temporary approval. Choosing yourself means you understand that your healing, your growth, your life, it all matters, and no one else can live it for you. It's about reclaiming the parts of you that you gave away too easily, the parts you traded for love, for attention, for false security. You take them back, not with anger but with clarity, and in doing so you rise. People may walk away when you choose yourself. Let them. They were never meant to stay if your peace made them uncomfortable. You'll find new energy. You'll attract relationships that don't demand explanations. You'll find people who understand your silence, who honor your boundaries, who don't ask you to shrink in order to be loved. That's the reward for choosing yourself. You become a magnet for truth, for depth, for connection that isn't conditional. So no, choosing yourself isn't selfish. It's how you stop bleeding for people who never planned to heal with you. It's how you end the cycle of self-abandonment. It's how you finally say, I matter too. We spend so much of our lives chasing validation, thinking if we can just get someone to understand us, to approve of us, then somehow we'll finally feel whole. It's subtle at first. Maybe you do something good and hope someone notices. Maybe you share your dreams with people hoping they'll say, yes, that's amazing, go for it. But somewhere along the way, it stops being about sharing and starts becoming a habit, constantly looking outward for the green light to live your life. You start performing instead of living. You shape yourself to fit into boxes that aren't yours. You say yes when you mean no. You shrink your truth just to avoid making others uncomfortable, and all the while you're hoping someone will see you, choose you, validate you. But that kind of validation is a trap, a prison disguised as connection. The more you rely on external approval, the more disconnected you become from yourself. You stop trusting your own voice. You hesitate on decisions because someone might not agree. You question your feelings because they don't align with what others expect of you. And the worst part, even when people do validate you, it never feels like enough, because deep down, you know it's not real if it doesn't come from within. It's borrowed confidence, and borrowed confidence is fragile. It breaks the moment someone disagrees, disapproves, or pulls away. Living for validation will exhaust you. It will drain you because you're always adapting, always editing yourself, always performing. And at some point, you have to ask, who are you doing all this for? Whose voice is dictating your worth? Who taught you that being understood by others is more important than being understood by yourself? Here's the truth most people don't want to face. Some people will never understand you, not because you're too complicated, but because their perception is limited. Their capacity to see your worth is shaped by their own wounds, their own biases, their own fears, and trying to earn their validation is like pouring water into a bucket with holes. No matter how much you give, it will never be enough. That's not a reflection of your value, it's a reflection of where you've been placing it. Freedom begins when you stop looking for permission to be who you are. It begins when you realize that you don't need someone to clap for you to know you're doing well. It begins when you validate yourself so deeply that even silence from others feels like peace, not punishment. And that self-validation, that's the kind of power that can't be taken away. It's not about arrogance. It's about alignment. When you're aligned with who you are, you don't need to over-explain, over-apologize, or over-give. You move differently, you protect your peace, you stop negotiating your worth, and people will notice that shift. Some will respect it, others will resent it, but that's not your burden to carry. Your only job is to remain true to yourself, even when it's uncomfortable, even when it means standing alone, because the moment you trade authenticity for approval, you lose both. So if you've been bending over backwards trying to be enough for everyone else, let this be the moment you stop. You were never meant to fit in a mold someone else built. You were never meant to beg for love or understanding or permission. You were meant to choose yourself, validate yourself, and live fully, even if no one claps. There's something powerful that happens when you go silent, not out of defeat, but out of decision. You stop explaining, stop arguing, stop trying to convince anyone of your worth or your intentions. And in that silence, something shifts. It's like you draw a line in the sand, not loudly, not aggressively, but clearly. That silence sends a message louder than any words ever could. I will no longer participate in my own disrespect. I will no longer hand over my peace just to make someone else feel in control. Toxic people, manipulative people, they thrive on your reactions. They feed off the energy you give when you try to prove your side of the story, when you try to defend your heart, when you try to explain why you deserve better. To them, it's not about resolution, it's about domination. They're not listening to understand, they're listening to twist your words, to keep you in a loop of self-doubt. And every time you engage, every time you justify yourself, you hand them more power. That's why silence isn't weakness, it's the ultimate form of taking your power back. You don't need to argue your value, you don't need to debate your boundaries. When you stop responding, you're not giving in, you're rising above. You're saying, I'm not available for this anymore. And sometimes the most revolutionary thing you can do is to say nothing. Let them sit in the space where your energy used to be. Let them wonder why their tactics no longer work. That confusion, that discomfort, that's not your problem to fix anymore. The moment you stop trying to be understood by those who only want to control you, you begin to heal. You start to feel the peace that comes with not being pulled into emotional chaos. You begin to see clearly without the fog of manipulation clouding your mind. And in that clarity, you begin to remember who you were before they convinced you that you were too sensitive, too needy, too much. You begin to return to yourself. Going silent is not about shutting down, it's about choosing what deserves your energy. It's about refusing to entertain conversations that only exist to drain you. It's about no longer participating in cycles that never change. You realize that your healing doesn't require anyone's permission or understanding. It just requires your decision. Some people will be shocked when you stop engaging. They'll push harder. They'll bait you with guilt, with accusations, with silence of their own. But don't take the bait. You've already said everything that needed to be said. Your silence now is not empty, it's full. Full of wisdom, full of boundaries, full of self-respect, and most importantly, full of power. And yes, it will be uncomfortable at first. You'll want to explain yourself, defend yourself, respond just one more time. But every time you don't, you grow stronger. You become more grounded. You create space for yourself to breathe, to reflect, to heal without interruption. And that space, that's where your transformation begins. That's where you stop surviving and start thriving. So when you feel the urge to speak just to be understood, pause, breathe. Remember that not everyone deserves access to your thoughts. Not everyone is capable of receiving your truth, and that's okay. Let your silence speak for you. Let it become your shield. Let it become your answer. Let it become your power. Healing isn't always loud. It doesn't always look like breakthroughs or big, dramatic moments. Sometimes healing is incredibly quiet. It happens in the small decisions you make every single day. The decision to walk away from chaos instead of getting pulled in. The decision to go to bed early instead of staying up overthinking. Decision to not return that text, not check their social media, not replay the same painful memory one more time. Healing is in the pause, in the breath, in the silence. It's in the choice to no longer abandon yourself for people who never showed up for you. You learn that you don't have to prove your growth. You don't have to showcase your progress to anyone. Because true healing is deeply personal. It happens inside, in those invisible spaces where only you know the battles you fought. It's the moment you respond differently to the same triggers that used to consume you. It's when your peace becomes more important than your pride. It's when your silence isn't silence at all. It's wisdom. As you grow, you begin to see how much energy you wasted explaining your pain to people who never had the capacity to hold it. You tried to bring understanding where there was no willingness to understand, and that's okay, because the point of healing was never to get others to see your worth. It was to remember it yourself. That's the shift, that's the power, when your self-worth no longer depends on external validation. You become untouchable. Unshakable. You begin to move with intention instead of insecurity. You speak when it matters and stay silent when it protects your peace. Healing teaches you discernment. You begin to see who genuinely cares for your soul and who only sticks around when they can benefit from your struggle. You stop explaining your boundaries to people who only want to cross them. You stop reopening doors just because someone knocks. You stop letting people back in just because they finally noticed your absence, because now you know your silence isn't just an absence of noise. It's an act of reclaiming your energy, your space, your life. In this healing, you find that you no longer need to be loud to be heard. You no longer need to shout to be seen. You don't even need to be understood to feel whole. You carry your worth with you. Quietly, firmly, you trust your intuition over anyone else's opinion. You choose your peace over anyone else's chaos. And slowly, you begin to feel lighter, not because life got easier, but because you stopped carrying what was never yours to hold in the first place. It doesn't mean you're immune to pain. It means you no longer let it control you. You still feel deeply. You still care. But you now know when to walk away, when to pause, when to protect your peace at all costs. You've learned that your silence isn't a punishment or a retreat. It's a conscious decision to stop bleeding for people who never offered you a bandage. It's the quiet power that says, I choose me every time, no matter what. So if you find yourself in the middle of the noise, unsure if your silence is enough, trust that it is. Because healing isn't about proving anything. It's about becoming whole quietly, courageously, and on your own terms.